Okay, I'm back. This is Randy Miller with Your American Sheriffs, and I need to do another video because we keep getting conflicting information on just what HCR 2039 or Prop 135 for Arizona is, which is granting emergency powers for the governor. The first thing I want to address, number one, is there was I'm looking at my phone. I got a text message showing that the memorandum regarding HCR 2039 that came out from Representative Alex Culloden. He's bragging about how he and Joseph Chaplik sponsored this bill because former Governor Ducey's decision to suspend your civil liberties and endlessly rule by executive decree during COVID scandemic. Now, he's admitting in his email or his letter that it was a scam, and yet we were controlled by governor's declarations, which are unconstitutional. I'll explain again. It is for this reason that they were proud to introduce this resolution, which will be on your ballot. If enacted in the law, HR will reinforce our system of checks and balances. Wrong. And that the governor's emergency powers automatically terminate after 30 days. Yes, but we'll explain that too, because there shouldn't be emergency powers, and I'll go over that. I also met with Greg from Arizona Free Enterprise Club. Now, I like Greg. I think he's well-intentioned. He's very young. Doesn't have the life experiences that many of us did when you work in the law enforcement field and you have to implement some of these ridiculous orders or laws that come out and see the impact that they have on real people on the streets. You understand a little bit more than you do for. No, well, let's just leave it at that. But Greg is a nice young man. I think he's well intentioned, and he just doesn't fully understand. He's been programmed or gave interpretations that are incorrect and misleading, and he's going with that on this particular project that he's working with, Prop 135. So, but when we met, his issues were is that the governor. I'm going to look at my notes here. I apologize. The governor has an inherent power to declare an emergency. Okay, let's talk about that. No, he does not. The governor has an inherent power to react to an emergency. There's no need to declare an emergency, and it's not semantics. It is very specific because the need to react is part of his requirements as his job as a governor. The governor has the power to react to an incident that has emergency impact on the community. Now, an emergency in and of itself is temporary, and declaring an emergency doesn't change the fact of his ability to react to it. He gave an example of a bridge collapse, and I'm looking at my notes again, that if there's a bridge collapse and it's an emergency and he needs to draw legislative funds for that, and the only way he can do that is to declare an emergency. How ridiculous is that? Anybody who's worked in government, any agency, any department head needs to take care of their duties in respects to what's the impact that they could face. In California, for instance, and in Arizona, we have fires. In California, there are lots of bridges. They have earthquakes. So the Department of Transportation should be planning for the maintenance and repair or possibly even reconstruction of bridges that are in areas where earthquakes are common. What do? They look at geological surveys. They make assessments based on past earthquakes and future predictions, and they take into consideration what they need for just general maintenance, repairs, and upkeep of bridges. They submit that in their request for funding as a department for the budget that's done annually. And then they reassess it for the next year. And they set aside funds for these contingencies. There's not a need for declaring our bridge went out as an emergency. What are we, reactionary? Or are we proactive. If this is a reactionary government, it isn't any wonder why we fail. The governor has an emergency. He's mandated, the laws can be set up to mandate that he have certain reactionary authorities should a situation like that occur. And I believe they have them. You don't need to declare state emergency. That's ridiculous. An emergency declaration in this instance is only to draw funds from the federal government, which is unconstitutional. They don't have authority to give money, grant money, or waive loans under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, the spending clause. They can only spend on those specific duties granted to them in the following 17 sections. That's it. And guess what? Granting money, making loans, or helping states in emergencies is not in there. I've done a Substack on this and explained earlier request in the early 1800s. One of them was roads, and they was denied. It was vetoed by the president because it's not a function of their government, and it does not for the welfare of the entire country. They don't do that. So you don't have a declaration of emergency so you can get funds from the federal government, which is exactly what they did the last time. You have a planning program, you fund it through budgetary process and set aside funds for emergencies. And the legislature has the ability, and the governor has the ability to call the legislature back into emergency session if it exceeds the needs that they have. So that argument is all wet. It's not necessary. Ignore it. It's not applicable to the needs of the governor. He can call an emergency session and say, hey, we have a shortage of funds. Can we work on this? And I need some help getting funding for it. The emergency services are already in place. The other issue he has is, let's see, well, I covered it. They want money. Number one, he can call the legislature back in session, no problem. Number two, he has an inherent right to react to an emergency, not declare an emergency. Let me explain that. If we, under Article 4, Section 25 of the Arizona's Constitution, is a section, it's the last section of the Arizona Constitution for the legislature. It says that continuity of government during time of emergency. Wow, okay, so just the title alone, the only section under Article 4 for the legislature says the legislature shall provide for the continuity of government. I'm going off memory here. Provide for the continuity of government during time of emergency, which that emergency is enemy attack during time of war. So in our entire Constitution, the only provision provided for an emergency was during war, not anything that we've been going through. The governor can react to that. That's his inherent power, is to react to an emergency because that's what's expected. So during time of war, what can the legislature, what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to provide for the continuity of government. So by doing two things, number one, if we have an executive position that is unavailable due to the war, they can do two things. They can fill it by vacancy. If it's a vacancy, they can appoint someone to fill that vacancy so that service continues as a department. The second thing they can do, if they can't appoint anybody, they make a provision, and this should all be done by law now. They make a provision that allows for the transfer of a specific government function to another government agency so those operations can continue. Now, if that is during time of war and they specifically spelled out what they should be doing, why do they think that the governor has an inherent power to declare an emergency when they don't even declare an emergency during war? All they do is they make sure that there's provisions available under law to make sure that government services continue. So I'm sorry, Greg, you're not correct on this. And Alex, you're not correct because it is not a way to maintain a balance of power. What you should do is rescind or take off the books those laws that are unconstitutional that as a legislative branch, the Republicans put into place under Title 26 and 36. Those are the laws that you guys put in there, maybe not you personally, but the legislature unconstitutionally, that violates the separation of powers, that violates the checks and balance, because you all granted the power to the governor to declare an emergency. And under an emergency declaration, you authorized illegally the governor to do what you said he did, which is violate your civil rights and your civil liberties, because you gave permission for that. And then you have no way in there to suspend it unless you call a special session, which you all refused to do during COVID in 2001, I believe it was, or 2000, to terminate. We wanted you guys to call a special session to end the unconstitutional declaration and this violation of civil rights, and you all refused to, because Karen Fann put out an email saying that if we voted to have a special session, we would lose millions of dollars in federal funding. And we would no longer have the provision where we can violate the property rights of property owners and disallow or prohibit them from evicting people who weren't paying their rent. So you guys are all wrong. You want to do this properly, you vote no on 135, and you say you will rescind those laws that are unconstitutional. You cannot have the governor make law under your statutes and enforce the law. That is the legislator's responsibility under Article 4, Section 1. You make the law. The governor's to enact the laws to the best of their ability. And you all violated Article 3 of Arizona's constitutional, because it says that it's 3 branches of government and not one branch, they call them departments. I've said this before, but I'm going to repeat it. Not one department shall exercise the authorities or powers of another department. So you can't delegate something you yourself do not have, and you can't delegate an authority to the governor to do something the Constitution specifically says only you can do, make law. So this whole thing is wrong. You want to grant authority in the Constitution for the governor to proceed to suspend our rights for up to 30 days. They shouldn't have that ability for 30 seconds. You, Greg, even admitted those laws are unconstitutional, but yet your solution is, they can't do that. It's unconstitutional, but at least we want to limit it to 30 days and then it'll go away. Let's look at it the other side. Why would you put a time limit on a true emergency of 30 days if it's needed to be longer? And I'm not talking medical. You're talking out of both sides of your mouth there, all of you guys. You can't. Why would you do that? Number one, you don't need to call a state emergency. You react to the emergency. If a bridge is down, you block off traffic and you take care of that. Make sure public safety is adhered to, and that there's no possible injury from people being stupid and going into the area. You do that. People understand. People get it. You don't call a state of emergency to do that. You don't call a state of emergency on a pandemic or plandemic, as you admitted it was. We did it for decades, centuries. If you're sick, stay home. You don't dictate to the people the health that they're supposed to follow. The other thing is the Arizona Constitution under Article 27, Section 2, which is your health rights. Read that, Section 2, that whole section. You cannot be forced, coerced, or mandated to participate in the medical system. And your system you have in there is defined under that constitutional section is to include treatment. So let's rethink all of this, go back to the drawing board and just get rid of those unconstitutional laws that Greg admits are unconstitutional. And let's work together to take care of that. We're here to help. Let's do that. And I'm going to end it here because I know I could go on forever, but that's basically the importance of this whole thing, is to counter. You don't need to declare a state of emergency. Number one, it is not an inherent power of the governor. The inherent power of the governor is to react to suppress an emergency or take care of an emergency. And the funding should be done during their planning. I know government planning is an oxymoron, but they need to do it. Their budgets are to include emergency contingencies and have a reserve for these emergencies. If they can't cover it from the reserves that they fail to get, then the governor has the authority to call in a special session and address that. End of story. That is their inherent power. Follow the Constitution under Article 5. That is their powers. There's no inherent power outside of that. The Constitution of the state does not specifically delineate the authorities, but it is spelled out under the Declaration of Rights, Article 2, Section 2. All political powers inherent in the people. The governments derive their just powers from our consent. That includes this nonsense. And their purpose is to maintain and preserve individual rights. That means you have a right to walk down the street without being mugged or assaulted. So they put laws in place to preserve your right to get. So they have assault and battery charges. They have mugging charges. They have robbery charges. You have that right. You have a right to drive down the street without someone trying to drive you off the road. So they have road rage laws. They have laws to protect you for your safety because it's your right. They have laws to protect your home from burglary or from vandalism. So they have laws for that. That is the specific spelled out function of government, to protect and preserve individual rights. So that's pretty clear. Any law they make is to do that. This is not an inherent right of the government. I'm Randy Miller, and thank you for listening.